AITA for making my unfaithful wife panic by exposing her lover's secret? My name is Jackson, and I have always been a numbers person, a man of blueprints and solid foundations. I work as an architect at a major firm in downtown Chicago, and my whole life has revolved around order, foresight, and stability. Brooke, my wife, was the exact opposite. She was pure creativity, a marketing manager at a tech company, luminous, spontaneous, or at least that is how I saw her. I thought her energy compensated for my rigidity. That October night, I discovered that all that balance was an illusion. My life, as I knew it, collapsed without warning. I remember the nervous shake on my shoulder, the lamplight turning on suddenly, and my eyes struggling to adjust to the brightness. Brooke was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face ashen, her eyes swollen from crying. At first, half asleep, my mind went to the worst. A car accident, a sudden illness, something related to my parents or hers. I wish it had been that. When she started speaking, I understood that what was coming was much worse. Without beating around the bush, she threw the truth in my face. She had been seeing another man for 8 months. 8 months. It was not a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a perfectly organized double life. His name was Julian, a freelance photographer she had met at a corporate event back in February. While Brooke tried to explain her guilt through tears, I felt something inside me slowly turning off. I did not feel rage or the urge to scream. What I felt was a deep, absolute cold. She told me they had fallen in love, that they shared coffees in the West Loop, walks along the lakefront trail, and nights in boutique hotels. All that while I thought she was simply working late. But the real reason she woke me up that night was not regret. That was the most painful stab. Julian had given her an ultimatum. If she did not leave our condo and our marriage within 48 hours, he would leave her. Brooke was not confessing to me out of honesty. She was doing it out of fear of losing her lover. I got out of bed without saying a single word. She expected yelling, accusations, a dramatic scene. She got none of that. I only felt the urgent need to get away from her and everything she represented in that moment. I grabbed my phone and locked myself in the den. From there, I could hear her muffled sobs on the other side of the door, while my fingers moved quickly across the screen. I needed to know who this Julian was who felt entitled to put an expiration date on my marriage. Thanks to my professional network and a certain knack for digital investigation, I found his professional profile in less than 10 minutes. Julian R., artistic photographer, studio in Wicker Park, black and white photographs, pretentious, very auteur-like, nothing unexpected. But by cross-referencing information on an old, forgotten social media profile, the first twist appeared, one that Brooke had no idea existed. My heart started beating hard, not out of sadness, but out of pure adrenaline. There was Julian, the man demanding exclusivity from my wife, smiling at a children's party barely 3 weeks ago. The caption of the photo read, "Celebrating my princess's 5th birthday with the best life partner." Tagged in the image was a woman named Victoria. Julian was neither single nor free. Julian had been married for 9 years and had 2 young daughters. I stared at the illuminated screen in the dark. Brooke had destroyed our life for a man who was selling her the same lie she was selling me. She was not special. She was the other woman, and she did not even know it. At that moment, the sadness completely disappeared and was replaced by a cold and dangerous clarity. It was 4 in the morning, and I made a decision. I was not going to be the victim of this story. I was going to be the architect of their downfall. I called Mike, an old friend and former Chicago PD detective who now ran his own private security firm. I needed to confirm Julian's home address and his wife's information before sunrise. Brooke thought the drama ended with her confession, but she had no idea that the game had just begun and I already had the opposing king in check. At 6:30 in the morning, my phone vibrated with the final confirmation. Mike, with the relentless efficiency that had always characterized him, sent me a complete digital dossier. It not only validated my suspicions, it also dismantled the entire lie on which Julian's life rested. The supposed bohemian artist did not live in a rented loft in the city. Julian Reed, 38 years old, resided in a sprawling house in Naperville, a quiet and affluent suburb, with a shared mortgage, a minivan in the driveway, and a perfectly conventional life. I walked down the stairs with my phone in my hand, feeling every step as if it were a sentence. In the kitchen, Brooke was sitting in front of a cup of coffee she had not touched. Seeing me enter, she looked at me with a sad mixture of hope and panic, as if she still believed everything could be fixed. She tried to speak, mentioned therapy, second chances, solutions. I was not there to negotiate anything. I poured myself a black coffee with a calmness that completely threw her off. I sat across from her and slowly slid the phone across the marble countertop. On the screen was a private account that Mike had managed to access. The image was clear. Julian under the August sun on a beach in Florida, hugging a blonde woman, surrounded by two little girls building a sandcastle. The photo was 2 months old, right when Brooke had told me she was at an intensive work seminar. I watched in silence as the truth made its way across her face, piercing through the pain like an irreparable crack. First, confusion appeared on her face. She frowned, observing the screen as if the image did not quite fit with the man she thought she knew and loved. Then came the denial, that absurd second where the mind tries to reject what is right in front of it. And finally, the definitive blow, pure horror. Brooke dropped the phone suddenly as if it burned her hands. The tears returned, but they were no longer tears of guilt. This time they were born from the deepest humiliation. The man for whom she was willing to blow up our 4-year marriage had not only pressured her with a fake ultimatum, but had reduced her to the oldest and most pathetic role that exists, the naive lover who thinks she is special. She tried to justify herself by saying she did not know, that he had sworn he lived alone, that he was separated, at least emotionally. Hearing her defend her own blindness only increased the contempt I felt. I explained to her with an almost clinical coldness that deep down we had both been deceived, but there was an essential difference between us. She had made the decision to betray. I told her that Julian's ultimatum had nothing to do with love, but with fear. His wife was probably starting to suspect, and he needed to cut the loose end before his orderly suburban life collapsed. Brooke was that loose end. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Brooke collapsed onto the table, hiding her face in her hands, suddenly understanding that in a single night she had lost her home and her dignity for something that was never real. I got up and grabbed my car keys. I felt no pity. I told her, without raising my voice, that she had until 9 p.m. to pack her things and leave. I did not want to see her when I returned. She looked up, terrified, and asked where I was going with that dark expression she no longer recognized. I did not answer her. I owed her no explanation. I left the condo, and the cold morning air hit my face, but it failed to put out the fire raging inside me. I got into the car and typed the address of the photo studio in Wicker Park into the GPS. It was 7:15 and the Eisenhower Expressway was already starting to clog up, though I did not care. I had a pending conversation with the man who felt entitled to play with other people's lives. Julian Reed thought it was all over when he forced Brooke to break up with me. What he did not know was that the game had just begun and I had a decisive advantage. I had nothing to lose. I found an impossible parking spot on a side street off Damon Avenue, right in the heart of Wicker Park. The neighborhood was waking up with its slow rhythm, a mix of artists and young professionals, completely oblivious to the storm I carried inside. The building where he worked was a rehabbed loft property with exposed brick and large industrial windows. The kind of place that boasts of bohemian success, even if it is usually paid for with a spouse's stable salary or inherited money. I walked up the 2 flights of wooden stairs that creaked under my steps, noticing how the adrenaline transformed into a cold and calculating calm. I had not gone there to get into a fist fight. That would be vulgar and simple. I was going to take him apart piece by piece. In front of the frosted glass door, which read Reed Photography, I did not ring the bell. I took out my phone and dialed the number Mike had given me. I heard the ringtone sound on the other side of the door, and, seconds later, a male voice, still sleepy, answered. Without mincing words, I told him that his lover's husband was on the other side of the door and that he had exactly 10 seconds to open it, or my next call would be to Victoria, his wife, with an invitation to see his unofficial work. The call was abruptly cut off. 6 seconds later, the deadbolts turned with a metallic click and the door opened. There was Julian. He was just as I had imagined him, and yet disappointingly normal. Intentionally worn designer jeans, a simple t-shirt that cost more than any of my office shirts, and carefully disheveled hair. He looked at me, trying to maintain a mix of defensive arrogance and real fear, positioning his body to block my path. I did not ask for permission. I stepped forward and forced him to step back. The studio was spacious, full of spotlights, tripods, and huge enlargements of his black and white photos. Everything was designed to impress, to seduce. It was the perfect set for a predator masquerading as a sensitive artist. He tried to take control of the situation with clumsy excuses, saying that things had just happened, that he never wanted to hurt anyone. He spoke of passion, of a spiritual connection with Brooke, repeating the same romantic story he had used to manipulate her. I listened to him without interrupting, scanning the space until I noticed a corkboard over his desk. Among invoices and sketches, there were several Polaroids. In one, Brooke appeared smiling shyly. In the others, 3 different women in almost identical poses. At that moment, I understood the true dimension of his game. Brooke was not the love of his life. She was just the temporary star of the season. I turned to him, and his smug smile disappeared when I took out my tablet. I showed him the complete dossier, his home address in Naperville, his daughter's school, his wife's workplace. I explained to him with a terrifying calmness that I did not care about his emotions or his artistic justifications. I detailed how his comfortable life, built on lies, was going to blow up before noon. I made it clear to him that I could turn him into a social and professional pariah, making sure Victoria kept the house, the girls, and every last dollar in the divorce. The color drained from his face. The rebel artist disappeared, leaving a small man trembling with fear. He asked what I wanted in exchange for my silence. It was not money. I told him I wanted the truth, but not for me. I took out my phone and turned on the video camera. I ordered him to sit on the stool he used for his portraits and gave him very clear instructions. He had to record a message for Brooke. Not a romantic or sad goodbye, but the naked reality. I instructed him to look directly into the camera and tell the truth without embellishments. He had to admit that it had all been a game, that he had never loved her, that Brooke had only been a distraction from his boring marriage, and that he was now going back to his wife because, in the end, that was the only thing that mattered to him. Julian hesitated. His ego resisted being exposed in such a miserable way. Then, without saying a word, I slowly slid my finger over the contact that said Victoria Home. It was more than enough. He sat on the stool, swallowed hard, and with a broken voice, started speaking into the lens. It was pathetic and cruel at the same time. He confessed that he had used her, that the ultimatum had been a farce, and that she meant nothing compared to his family. I recorded every second of his cowardice, making sure his face was perfectly lit by the very spotlights he used to fake his art. When he finished, I saved the video and headed for the exit without looking back. Before closing the door, I made one last thing clear to him. If he ever came near Brooke again, if he sent her a single message or tried to contact her in any way, the video and the entire dossier would reach Victoria's hands in a matter of minutes. I left him there alone, sitting in the gloom of his studio, surrounded by his artistic pretensions and reduced by his own mediocrity. I walked down the stairs with a strange pressure in my chest. I carried with me the ultimate weapon to destroy Brooke's last illusion, the irrefutable proof that her great love story had been nothing more than a lie. I knew that showing her that video would be the final blow, the act that would break her heart beyond repair. Even so, it was a necessary pain. It was the only way to close the wound, and ironically, also the only way to free her from him. As I drove back home, I realized that my revenge did not bring me happiness. The only thing I felt was a dark, cold satisfaction, the feeling of having balanced the scales. But fate, always capricious, still had one last surprise in store for me, a twist that not even my calculating mind had foreseen, and that would forever change the end of this story. The drive back to my condo was an uncomfortable mix of anxiety and bitter triumph. The phone seemed to burn on the passenger seat, loaded with the digital proof that would end any trace of affection Brooke might still feel for Julian. In my head, I rehearsed the scene, walking in, connecting the phone to the living room TV, and forcing her to watch in high definition how her lover discarded her like a worthless object. It was cruel, I know, but also necessary to wake up someone trapped in an emotional coma. However, upon turning onto my street, the script I had written shattered into pieces. There was a car I did not recognize parked in my designated spot, an impeccable, luxury black SUV. The license plate was unfamiliar. My first thought was immediate. Julian had arrived before me. He had come looking for her. A wave of primitive fury ran through my body. I got out of my car, slamming the door, and entered my own home as if it were enemy territory, prepared for a physical confrontation. But what I found in the living room was much worse than any fight. Brooke was not alone, and she was not with Julian. Sitting in my favorite armchair, with a rigid posture and an intimidating elegance, was a woman I recognized instantly from the photos in Mike's dossier. It was Victoria, Julian's wife. The silence in the room was dense, almost impossible to breathe. Brooke was huddled in a corner of the couch, trembling, her face disfigured by crying, like a child caught in an unforgivable act. Victoria, on the other hand, radiated a glacial calm. Seeing me come in, she stood up and analyzed me from top to bottom, as if evaluating the worth of an object. There were no tears in her eyes, only a contained, practical anger. Then came the first surprise of the day. I had not brought Victoria to my home. Brooke had. In a fit of desperation and rage after seeing the family photo on the beach, my wife had looked up Julian's landline number and had called, not to apologize, but to drop the bomb. She wanted him to suffer as much as she did. Without knowing it, she had opened a Pandora's box that neither of us could control. Victoria had not gone there to console her husband's lover, nor to make a jealous scene. She had gone to assess the damage. She introduced herself with a professional coldness that she soon explained. She was a criminal defense lawyer, a detail Julian had carefully omitted from his bohemian artist tale. While Brooke sobbed, Victoria laid out the reality of her marriage without any filter. She knew Julian was unfaithful. She had known for years. She tolerated it as long as he was discreet and did not jeopardize her status or financial stability. But this time he had crossed a red line, and it had nothing to do with feelings. Then came the second blow, the real one. Victoria pulled some bank documents from her designer handbag and dropped them on the coffee table. She looked at Brooke with contempt and then turned to me. She explained that Julian not only accumulated lovers, he also looked for female investors. His method was always the same. He seduced professional women, emotionally vulnerable and with access to capital. He sold them the story of the misunderstood artist who needed funding for his grand project and then disappeared with the money. I felt a knot in my stomach, a nauseating sense of anticipation. I looked at Brooke in silence, demanding an explanation she was unable to give me. She lowered her gaze, incapable of meeting my eyes. Victoria spoke for her. Julian had convinced her to invest in renovating his studio, promising her shares in a supposed art gallery. I ran to my home office, turned on the computer, and accessed our joint savings account, the money we had saved for 4 years for a down payment on a lake house. The screen confirmed the disaster. The balance was close to zero. $50,000 were missing, transferred just 2 weeks ago to an account linked to a shell company that, according to Victoria, belonged to Julian. I felt like the world was crashing down on me. The infidelity had already been a devastating blow. But this was different. This was a direct desecration of our future, of my years of effort, of every hour of overtime. Brooke had not only surrendered her body and her feelings, she had also financed her affair with the money we had built together. The rage that pierced through me was so clean, so white, that I had to lean on the desk so as not to lose my balance. From the living room, Brooke began babbling excuses. She said it was a loan, that he would pay it back, that they had signed documents. Victoria let out a dry, sharp laugh, like a blade. Those papers were worthless. Julian was legally insolvent. Everything was in her name, Victoria's. I returned to the living room with the laptop in my hand, feeling like a ghost walking through a life I no longer recognized. I connected the computer to the television. I did not mention the money. There were no words for that. I simply pressed play on the video I had recorded barely an hour ago. Julian's face filled the screen. Pathetic, frightened eyes, a trembling voice, confessing that Brooke meant nothing, that she had just been a pastime, that he was going back to his wife. The impact was immediate and brutal. Brooke let out a sound that did not seem human, a torn scream seeing how the man for whom she had lost everything erased her so easily. Victoria watched the confession without moving a single muscle in her face, though I noticed her knuckles tensing as she squeezed her hand back. When the video ended, the silence left behind was absolute, broken only by Brooke's irregular breathing. I looked at the two women, at the deceived wife who controlled the money and the scammed lover who had lost everything. I felt a deep disgust for all of them, for Julian, for Brooke, and even for Victoria's mathematical coldness. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. When I spoke, my voice felt alien, empty. I told Victoria to take her car and her husband out of my life, that we would see each other in court to recover the money, even if I had to sue her as an accessory. She understood the threat, nodded stiffly, and left without saying goodbye. Then I turned to Brooke. She tried to approach, to touch me, saying that she had been scammed, that she was a victim too. I took a step back, dodging her hand as if it were contagious. I reminded her that victims do not drain their family's savings to hand them over to a stranger. I told her that the offer to stay until 9 p.m. had expired. She had 10 minutes to leave my home with the clothes on her back. I would send the rest of her things in boxes, or maybe not. She tried to protest, but something in my look stopped her. She understood that Jackson, the understanding and methodical husband, had disappeared. In his place was someone who no longer felt anything for her. She walked out dragging a small carry-on, crying, defeated, and for the first time fully aware of the magnitude of her mistake. I closed the door and slid the deadbolt. I was left alone, in the silence of an empty and ransacked home. I looked at the black screen of the television and then at the bank balance on the laptop. I was alone, with a broken heart and an almost empty account, but as the midday sun streamed through the windows, I knew something with absolute clarity. This was not over. Julian believed that video had saved him. Victoria thought she could shield her assets. Brooke believed her punishment was losing the marriage. They were all wrong. I dialed my lawyer's number, not the divorce one. I called the most aggressive financial fraud litigator in my firm's network. The emotional revenge was over. Now the real war began. I was going to get my life back, dollar by dollar, and I would make sure Julian Reed ended up paying for every lie. 14 months have passed since that October morning when everything collapsed. Time, just like justice, ends up putting everyone in their place. The legal battle was tough, but hiring that litigator was the right decision. With Mike's investigation and Victoria's forced cooperation, we uncovered the whole truth. Julian had not only scammed me. There were at least 3 other women, deceived with the same story of love and art. Victoria, practical to the end, turned her husband over to the authorities to protect her career and her daughter's future. The bohemian artist traded his Wicker Park studio for a cell in a state penitentiary. He was convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud. His freedom was the price of his arrogance. Brooke, on the other hand, became a shadow of who she had been. The scandal reached her tech company, and the public humiliation, combined with the debts Julian left in her name, sank her. She lost her job, her reputation, and her independence. I know she had to move back in with her parents. She tried to contact me several times with handwritten letters, full of belated remorse. I never opened them. They ended up in the shredder, just like our marriage. Her punishment was not my hatred, but my total indifference. She lives with the daily burden of knowing that she destroyed a solid life for an obvious lie, trading a real diamond for a piece of broken glass. I managed to recover 70% of our savings thanks to the seizure of Julian's assets before Victoria could liquidate them all. I sold the condo. There were too many ghosts in those hallways. With that money, I bought a penthouse in River North, an open and bright space that I designed myself, with no compromises or memories that hurt. Recently, I met Hannah, also an architect. She values structure and honesty as much as I do. There is no rush and no drama, just a quiet construction based on truth. Looking back, I understand that shake at 3:14 in the morning was not a tragedy, it was a rescue. It woke me up from a fake life. Today, as I watch the sunset over the Chicago skyline, I know that the best revenge was not seeing Julian in prison and Brooke in ruins. The true victory was rebuilding myself, being happy again, and proving that integrity always survives deception. I am free. Comment: when we face sudden betrayal, it feels like our entire world is collapsing right beneath our feet. Walking away from someone who broke that trust is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary step to protect our dignity. We cannot control how others treat us, but we hold complete power over how we respond and rebuild. True healing begins the moment we stop letting anger guide us and start focusing on our own peace. Sometimes the most painful endings are actually rescues in disguise that push us toward a much more authentic life. Choosing to walk forward with integrity is the strongest statement we can make after someone tries to tear us down. Leaving the past behind allows us to create space for genuine connections built on honesty and mutual respect. I hope you always remember your worth and never settle for anything less than real loyalty. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.